Thank you very much for joining me in this workshop on how to start a podcast. My name is Kwok Pui Lan. I am a distinguished scholar at the Episcopal Divinity School. In February, I started a podcast, Kwok and Roll. I hope some of you have either watched or listened to it. So some people have asked me, how did I start? Because this is pretty new for me too. So tonight, I'm going to share some of my experience, and I have invited my colleague, Suan Share, who is really a professional, to help answer all your tech questions. So let me introduce Suan Share to you. She is a Taiwanese-American songwriter, podcast producer, and filmmaker. She has a BA in music production and also an MA in musicology from the National Taiwan University. She has helped podcasters start and edit their podcasts, as well as help singers to produce their music. After she graduated, she took a trip around Taiwan Island and produced the documentary Wan Dao, which you can see in Vimeo. And she has kindly prepared a PowerPoint presentation, and so we'll just start showing the PowerPoint. And so we will divide our presentation into 3 parts. The first part, I will talk about the content, and then Suan will talk about the technical aspect as well as distribution and marketing. So starting a podcast. Why do we need to start it? Who, what, and when? And after we have answered those questions, how are we going to start a podcast? Now, first of all, we want to talk about part 1, content. Why, who, what, and when. I want to share with you why I want to start a podcast. I have appeared on podcasts several times. People interviewed me, and so this is not very new to me. But I thought this is a lot of commitment to start a podcast because you cannot just start and stop. So what prompted me to start this podcast, Kwok and Roll, was when I was flying back from a conference on the inauguration of President Trump's day, January the 20th. So when I was on the plane, I watched the record of his speech, and I was very certain that I needed to do something. Because when I watch about Christianity in YouTube or other social media platform, I would see a lot of fundamentalists or Christian rights people using that platform. And I hope to be able to share more about progressive Christianity. So I decided to start a podcast. What are some of the questions I need to think about? First, who? Who is going to be on the podcast? Will I be just speaking all the time? Or do I have just one host or several recurring co-hosts? Will I have guests? I think over a long career, I have many friends and colleagues I wanted to interview, Christian thinkers, theologians, people of other faith traditions, as well as activists. I will structure around people on progressive Christianity or faith traditions. Then what is the podcast about? Do you know that in 2023, there were about 4 million podcasts? So a lot of podcasts. But we have 500 million people who will listen to podcasts. That is a very big audience. That is why we need to think about the contents and especially what is the niche. For example, if we want to have a podcast about AAPI people, what aspect? Would it be Christianity or faith traditions? Or would it be in New York or throughout the United States or even include Asia? Some of those things we need to plan ahead. Would it focus on news, current events, or about books? For example, in my podcast, I interview some of the authors who have published new books. Would it be depending on what your guest would contribute? Now, after you have decided your niche, how long would it be? Will it be 30 minutes, an hour, or longer? I have decided that I want to make it shorter, maybe less than 30 minutes. Why? Because when I look at a podcast or a YouTube video, when it is 45 minutes or an hour, I said, wow, this is long. I really need to find time to listen or watch it. But if it is just 20-some minutes, then I might have the motivation to watch or listen. Then how often? I know that some podcasters, when they begin, they are less ambitious. They may have one episode per month. But I think per month is just too long. That is the interval. That is why I have decided to have it every week. And how much time do I have to dedicate to the project? That is also a good question to ask. Because it is not just the recording, it is also the editing that is very time consuming. We'll come to that part later. Now you decided you want to start a podcast. So how to find the name? I must tell you, so many people complimented me because my podcast is Quark and Roll. Actually, it was not something that I conjured up. A former student came up with 4 suggestions. Because before, I thought my podcast is going to be called Quark Talk. I thought that is very funny. But unfortunately, someone has that podcast name, so I cannot use that name. When a former student suggested 4 names, you know what? I put them on my Facebook page and asked my friends to vote. And more than half voted for Quark and Roll. So you can come up with a very funny name, but make it easy to remember. Sometimes the podcast will be theology with Kwok Pui Lan or with a certain person. You can also try that too.
Interject about the podcast name. You made some really good points about how it's good to Google and check to see if any other podcasts exist
Yes,
that have the name you want.
exactly.
Industry term we use called SEO, which is search engine optimization. So sometimes you want to choose a title that can help people who are interested in your topic find it because there's keywords and it'll help it come up more easily, but you don't want it to be so common that it gets mixed in with a bunch of very similar titles. So that's just a little.
Thank you. And now, because when your podcast appears on Apple or Spotify or other platforms, it needs the artwork. So this is my artwork. And then on the right, and that is the artwork from Canva. You can easily find one and just change something, and it is not difficult. And now, before I didn't know that is the episode title and the thumbnail can have different words. Why? Because you are given 2 opportunities for people to search for the content. I interviewed Sue-Ann, so for the YouTube thumbnail, it's called Queer Ministry and Music. But the title is not Queer Ministry and Music. And the title, I put it to be queer and spiritual. You do not need to repeat the same title and thumbnails. And now I want to talk about the contents of the episodes. I will start my podcast welcoming people, and then I'm the host. And then afterwards, I talk about the guest. And it is important to have a short hook for 30 seconds or so at the beginning to tell people what this episode is about, why they need to continue to listen to it. And then you might need to think about the narrative structure. That is how to begin the interview, or if you are the one speaking, and how you are going to construct the narrative. Would it be more conversational? I have heard that a podcast is less formal. It's not like giving a lecture. So the conversational style is more appealing and attractive. And for my podcast, since I have guests, you might need to think about, do you want to send the guest questions ahead of time? I do, because some of the guests request that. And I send them 5 or 6 questions for a podcast of about 20 to 25 minutes. And then from those questions, we can branch off and depending on what the guest would say. And then at the end of the episode, of course, you thank the guest and you thank your audience. But you can also then say something about advertising for your podcast, what is coming up, or ask them to comment or subscribe to your podcast. So now I want to move on and invite Suan to talk about the technical aspects.
To add on to what you were just talking about with format, we've discussed this for Quack and Roll, but most podcasts have some sort of bumper music, intro or outro music that kind of helps smooth those transitions. So those usually come in right after the hook that you mentioned. And then usually after the end of the conversation, there's the outro music. And then people will do the thank you for listening today and subscribe. When it comes to music, there's lots of royalty-free options that you can use on the internet, which basically mean you don't have to pay money, you can use it. But oftentimes you run the danger of the music being not very good quality, or you want to have something that's custom. You want an audio signature that your audience will associate. So when they hear it, they think your podcast. That's about brand recognition. So one thing that I do sometimes with my clients is we work together to craft original music for their podcast that they can use without paying royalties because they pay me a one-time fee and I record and compose it for them. Or many of the platforms now have royalty-free music options that you can use if you don't want to do that. Anyway, that brings us to this next section, which is around the technical. And oftentimes, when people decide they want to start a podcast, they begin with the how. They start buying equipment and paying for software or other technical tools. They look at hosting and distribution. But as we just talked about, it's more important to ask the questions of what you are creating. To use an analogy, it's hard to build a house and hire a contractor or even buy materials without a blueprint. What tools are you going to need and who are you going to need to help? And also what your budget will be, because knowing what kind of supplies and services you need are also crafted around the hope of your podcast. There's 3 kind of major areas. One is recording, the second is editing, and the third is mixing. In Dr. Kwok's podcast, she does video and audio, and that is becoming increasingly popular. But most podcasts are just audio. Most podcasts are recorded remotely, so people don't have to be in the same space or in the same room. They can record, but in order to do that, you need some sort of audio call or video chat platform. Sometimes I've just used FaceTime or Skype. Sometimes you use Zoom. And I know that Dr. Kwok uses StreamYard, a streaming platform, so that people can access that and record it together. At the same time, you're also going to be using an editing platform. The technical term we use in the industry is a digital audio workstation, or a DAW. There's video editors, and then also usually those editing platforms include things like volume adjustment and compression. So let's say you have parts that are really quiet and parts that are really loud. A compressor will even out the sound so that when you turn it up, it's not super loud in the super loud parts, but too quiet in the too quiet parts. You can also do equalization, and so you can make the audio sound different by adding EQ. Ducking is basically when you have more than one piece of audio at the same time, so one becomes quieter so that the other one can be heard more easily. And then the issue of mastering, which is after you've edited the entire thing, how do you bring the volume up? So some of you who listen to podcasts might have heard some podcasts are very quiet. They're actually very hard to listen to. And you turn up all the volume all the way up on your phone or your listening device and you can't hear it. That is a mastering problem. Here I did a little signal flow chart. So you can see how under recording, there's your platform for talking, right? Whether it's StreamYard, use Zoom, use FaceTime or Skype. That's how you are being connected to the other person. At the same time that you do that, you're also going to be recording the conversation. So you can do that through some of the free software. If you have a MacBook, the GarageBand is free. You can also use Audacity. If you want to spend money, Logic is a prosumer software. Final Cut Pro is also a video editing software that you pay, but not at the highest level. Pro Tools is what I use, but that's because I'm a professional audio engineer. So I pay them the rate for the highest level of equipment. And the trade-offs that you get is when you have a free software, it's usually harder to use. It has less functions. The more you pay, the more functions it has to use. But the trade-off is if you haven't been trained or you don't have a lot of experience, sometimes you can pay money for a very expensive piece of equipment, but then not even use it because you don't know how to use it. So, what I try to recommend to people is starting off with the tools that you already have and gaining fluency with those. Then, once you start to get more experience, you could move up to something that's more expensive or you might want to invest some money in. And those skills that you learn from one will usually transfer to the other in a way. You don't have to use one of these fancy things. For instance, sometimes when I record podcasts, I just have a FaceTime or a Skype with somebody. And what happens is they use their phone to record their audio. So if you have an Apple phone, there's actually a function on here called voice memos. Some of you might have used it before. So you can actually just take your phone, hit record, and you can record your voice right here. Or you can use your AirPods, which have a microphone, or the headphones that come with your phone. They usually have pretty decent quality now. And what you can do is each of you can hit record where you are, and then you just talk through your video chat. Then what you do is you edit these two recordings together. One has me, one has the other person, and then you put it together and you synchronize it. That's actually the simplest way to do it, but it can be messy sometimes synchronizing because you have two recordings on two different sides. But what I do sometimes I clap and then we know what to sync from one end to the other. So, what's really popular right now, since so much podcasting is happening now, especially with people who don't have professional experience with audio editing or video editing, is what I call all in one service providers. Here's a list of some of them. There's Descript, Podcastle.ai, Riverside.fm, and Alitu. And what they do is they allowed you to record into the platform and they'll also edit it and they'll also allow you to mix it there. Some of these also allow you to do video as well. Usually, if you want more features, more data storage, it costs more money per month for your subscription. So that's one thing to keep in mind is to think about how much data, how long your podcast will be. The longer an episode is, the more data it will be. But this way, you can have all in one. These also then provide distribution. So once you finish editing, you can use the same platform to then host and distribute your podcast to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube. And I know that Dr. Kwok has been using Descript. If you want to share a little bit about what your experience has been like using that platform.
Yes, I like this because this allows me to have a transcript of the podcast. With the transcript, I can then edit. For example, I want to cut something that I do not want to be included. I can just cut it, just like editing a text, and then it will be gone. And not only that, if I wanted to say another word, I want to correct myself, and then I can ask the AI to generate that word or that phrase. So I do not need to record again.
Yeah, it also has the function of AI editing out ums and pauses that they might have, which I know has been really helpful since many people talk with many pauses.
Yes, exactly.
A lot of these all-in-one service providers have those kind of AI skills or tools that are available. You can check them and compare their prices, their features. Often they will let you do a free trial before you commit to paying. And they do multiple script, like a free trial, basic, professional, advanced. So you can suss out. I do recommend that. I think if it's your first time and you feel very ambitious about your desire to do podcasting, that one of these all-in-one service providers can be a really big help. If, however, you are scrapping and you have a very low budget and you have a willingness to learn more technical things and to learn how to edit, because those are also transferable skills that you can use in other areas of your work, perhaps. I recommend learning and using some of the more traditional audio and video editing services. But these are some of the ones that are there. Riverside, it used to be called Anchor FM, but then it got bought out. So if you've heard of that one, that's Riverside now. So this gets to the question we actually had at the beginning, right before we started. I see everyone buying and using these fancy microphones in podcasts. Should I buy one? should I buy software or start paying a subscription to an editing or mixing software for my podcast? And then here is actually one of the most popular podcast microphones. You might have seen it. It costs $100. It's not a bad microphone for the price, but I know a lot of people who bought these and then they sat on their desks forever and they never used them. So maybe before you do that, you can ask around in your community to see if anyone has an extra one you can use before you just decide to spend $100. 90% of podcasts do not record more than 3 episodes. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind. Before you go out and start spending hundreds of dollars on equipment and software and distribution services, make sure you actually have the time to commit to this. And most of all, energy and passion. I mean, with budget, you can work around it if you need to work around it. But at the end of the day, podcasting, it's a commitment. So before investing a lot of money, try recording a few episodes using equipment you already have. The case is likely that with the kind of phone or computer or the headphones that you have, between that and the free trial software, you can actually edit a few trial episodes. And then you can see how long it takes. You can figure out if you enjoy it and if you want to keep doing it. I think that the reason why 90% of podcasts don't record more than 3 episodes is because people have an idea of what podcasting will be. Once they actually try to do it, they realize, oh, this is not what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was just going to talk with my friends and become famous and rich, but that is not the case. It's mostly just a lot of work. This is in this picture, we have a picture of the microphone that Dr. Kwok has, which is $400. And it's one of the most commonly used broadcast microphones. It's a Shure SM7B. I have one over there as well that I use, and it's very popular for music. So people use it to record. If you're familiar with Michael Jackson's Thriller, he recorded the vocals on that microphone. But it's used a lot in radio as well as in podcasting. So some of these are not terrible investments if you want to continue to use the microphone for other functions as well. But if you just want to do a podcast, I'm here to tell you you don't need to spend $400 or $500 to make a good podcast. What matters first is the content. And then once you really have nailed down what your content is, then it makes sense to start scaling up in terms of the production quality. This is what I was saying earlier. Use equipment and tools you already have or are available in your community. If you're a student, your school maybe has digital media services. You could probably borrow equipment from them. If you're part of a church, churches often have interfaces and microphones and other audio equipment. So I encourage you to use existing resources and to ask around in your community. Someone might have an audio interface, someone might have a microphone. So you can also try things out before you commit. And also remember, double check the return policies on some of this equipment so you're not spending hundreds of dollars. But what I have here pictured is one of the most common USB interfaces. So this is a Scarlett, a Focusrite Scarlett, and it's a more traditional interface. So people use this for recording music all the time. And what it does is it takes XLR cables, which are the standard cables that we use for music recording. So if you go to your church and there's microphones there, they're using XLRs. And this is the XLR cable. It plugs into the interface. Then the interface plugs in through a digital cable into my computer. So on the interface, I can control the preamplifier, which is like the volume of the microphone. So actually, we had a conversation about this with Dr. Kwok because she has an interface built into her microphone, but she didn't realize that she had it, that she could control the volume. So she was saying, oh, it's very quiet when I use this microphone. I said, there's a software that's attached to the hardware that you bought. If you download it, you should be able to turn up the volume. And it made a huge difference after you started using that. And you get more features, more quality, more areas that you can adjust if you buy an interface. A lot of this is, again, very technical, and I do consulting, and so I'll talk a little bit more about that later, is if you just have a bunch of random things and you come to me and you say, hey, how could I do something with what I have? I do consulting and I help people figure out like what tools you can already use, how to use them, and then maybe what pieces of equipment you might need to make what you already have work. This brings us to the last part, which is the distribution and marketing. And if you've already gotten to this part, congratulations, because it's so hard to get to the point of figuring out the content and figuring out the technical part. And then you have to do one more big push, which is the distribution and marketing. As I mentioned, there are multiple kinds of solutions that you can use based on your needs, and they have a different level of cost. So the all-in-one as I mentioned, is like Descript or Podcastle or Riverside, and I put a little bit of on the cheaper end what their services cost there. You can compare them then to what our hosting services. So Libsyn, Buzzsprout, Podbean, these are more basic. So they basically just host your podcast and create what is actually called an RSS feed. So some of you, if you're familiar with blogs, if you're familiar with RSS, it's basically a series of websites in which you can create a subscription. And then that subscription gets pushed to different distribution methods. So that's what Libsyn, Buzzsprout, and Podbean do is they'll create an episode for each of your websites where you upload your podcast. There's the title, the description, the audio file on it. And then all of these other websites, these other platforms that this podcasting apps, they stream from the hosting site. So you can see that it's cheaper. So if I want to mix and match, for instance, I have all this recording equipment already because I do music. I don't need to pay for an all-in-one subscription that's going to cost me maybe $25 a month. I can just pay $7 a month to host my podcast and use all my existing software and gear. But if you want to save even more money, and this is an even more kind of advanced option, is you can actually set up your own RSS feed. So if you already have a website, if you have a blog, or if you have a Substack, all of those can be used for free to basically push an RSS feed to Spotify. So I already pay a subscription to Squarespace to host my website, suanshaw.com. And you can put a blog on your Squarespace website in addition to all the other pages on there. Then every blog, or you can think of your podcast as blog, is like every episode is having its own website. And then I set up an RSS feed and I can not have to pay any extra money. Substack does this as well as Squarespace. These are all options that cost basically no additional money. If you already are paying money for that service, then it's not extra. But that way, it's also possible for you to integrate if you already have some of these things, like to integrate your podcast into your website that already exists. Marketing. It's important to think about who your audience is and who do you want to reach and who are these people? What are they interested in and what platforms do they use? Some people, depending on their age group or their interests, they use lots of different platforms. And then how do they find things and that interest them? So sometimes I just like to ask my friends, "Oh, you really like this podcast. How did you find it?" Or if you really like that TV show, how did you hear about it? Because I'm always curious about it. And oftentimes it's word of mouth. People share things that they like with each other. And often it's cross promotion. Once you've identified your target audience, you can try to cross promote with other musicians or authors or writers or people on platforms that those who you want to reach might also be interested in. That's what happens a lot these days. I'm on someone's podcast and they're like, wow, Suanna is interested in a lot of things that I'm also interested in. So now I want to follow her. Now, the most important part, step 3, is actually listener retention. Once you've found your people, you have to connect with them and you have to treat them well and you have to build a relationship and a community with them. Providing a podcast that people are excited to listen to, that has quality and quantity, will make loyal listeners. For instance, there might be podcasts out there that have very high production quality. They use very fancy microphones and editing is very good, but what they talk about does not interest me. So I'm not going to listen to it. There are some podcasts that the content is so interesting, it's very original, and it connects with me, but sometimes it's hard to listen to because the audio quality is very bad. That's the place that you probably don't want to be. But the good news is you can always fix that. It's harder to fix it if it's not interesting or not good. So it's not only that having good production quality does help with listener retention, but it's also about building community and making sure you stay connected with your listeners. That's actually the best way to create a podcast, is to let it connect people and not just to put it out into the ether and wonder if anyone ever knows it. It's about following up once you have that initial connection. This is example of how connection spills into all these platforms. In terms of the applications people use to listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts is the most widely used podcast app in the world. The most popular app in the United States is Spotify. And part of that is that Spotify is just not used as much in other parts of the world. We have lots of international people here who know that. But there's also Google Podcasts, and I know that many people also release their stuff to YouTube because YouTube is one of the most accessible platforms out there in the world because you don't need to have a certain kind of phone or a certain kind of subscription. You could just access it and it's free and searchable. But even though there are increasingly more and more podcasts offered as video, the majority of them are streamed as audio only. The thing about doing a video podcast is that it doubles, if not triples, your workload and your costs and your data storage. And, the benefit of doing a video podcast might not be very apparent in the beginning. Most of the very big podcasts now do also do video, but those are the people who get like multi-million-dollar deals from other people, right? Not like normal people like us. And you probably won't be able to get that. So many distributors will also upload an audio only version. So let's say you only do audio, you don't do video. They'll put the audio recording and it'll just have as a graphic, and that's it. So those are often helpful too if people want to help people find you or find conversations or podcasts through the search function. And using platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram are often helpful for people to discover. So I know that this is something Dr. Kwok has been working on as well, is doing little teaser clips, little clips that promote that this is a new episode that's out. Or if they say something that's really interesting, you make a little clip and then people are like, oh, I want to listen to the whole episode now, the whole interview. Now, the last one I have here is like email and Facebook and Substack. And these are not platforms people are likely to actually consume your podcast on, but they are tools to cultivate those relationships and community with your audience base. So I know that some very popular podcasts, they actually have a Facebook group, and all the listeners of the podcast, they go there and then they can discuss the new episodes, or they can follow up and keep going the conversation that started on the podcast. So those are all examples of things that people do. That'll also bring up the issue. I was going to talk about Patreon in the next one, but this is about monetization generally. So number one is just setting expectations. Most podcasts will lose money. We hear the news sometimes about people signing multi-million-dollar deals. The majority of these podcasts that are out there are not making money. So I just encourage people, don't go into it expecting to be rich or famous, but make something good that you're passionate about and make it about wanting to connect with people who share your passions and interests, because that is a priceless thing that you can't monetize. If you do want to understand the monetization model, there are primarily two that are available to average podcasters. So the first one is advertising. So you've probably heard on some big podcasts, there's ads on it. And there's two ways that are done. Some distribution services, like the all-in-ones that I talked about, they offer monetizations and they negotiate with all of the advertisers already. And then they'll input those ads into yours and they'll collect and pay you. But that's like a very low rate usually. You don't make a lot of money off of that. There's also, if you are a bigger podcast and you have a bigger set of sponsors, you can actually negotiate directly with your sponsors or advertisers, and you're more likely to make more money that way. But it's also a lot of work to pitch potential advertisers and to collect that money. When I worked with Evolving Faith, which is a bigger progressive Christian group, I helped them to introduce advertisers for the first time into their podcast. And in that situation, they had partners that they worked with that often would sponsor their conference. So they could even reach out to them and say, oh, so we will do this 30-second ad, and that will cost this much money. And you can expect to get this many listens or this many downloads from it. But this is a podcast that has hundreds of thousands of downloads already. So we were able to bring in our pitch deck an example of how many downloads we have so that our potential advertisers can see, oh, if I pay for this, then I will get this many listeners. The other option is patronage. Patreon is very popular right now. You might have heard some of your favorite podcasts saying, if you want to support us, go to Patreon and you can sign up for a monthly donation. Sometimes people do that and they get special access, exclusive content. You could get the podcast early, or there are some episodes that are only available to Patreon subscribers. So people will sometimes pay extra money so they can access special features. But sometimes people will just support because they want to support your work and they value what you do. And this Substack also allows for this model as well. Even though it's less associated with podcasting, it's more associated with newsletters. It also is set up to easily do a patronage subscription model. Substack also allows for podcasting. So if you want to set up a monetization model through that, you can do that. We're going to open it up and y'all can bring up any questions that you might have that we didn't cover already. Or if there's something you want to go back to and ask more specific questions about, we can do that too.
Thank you very much. The presentation, especially by Suen, is very thorough. That covers all the different aspects.
We have a question in the chat, so I'm going to read it out loud for everyone.
Please.
All this information is very helpful, and I know I'll come back to review it when I start working on a podcast. My question is more on the psychological side. I've always found it hard to stay focused when I'm in front of a camera or being recorded. Recently, I was asked to do a short video interview to promote a course. It was meant to feel casual and natural, but I found it surprisingly difficult, which really bothered me, since I usually feel fine when I'm teaching. I'm more used to giving scripted academic talks, so I wonder, based on your experiences, are there ways to get more comfortable with a conversational style, or maybe podcasting just isn't a good fit for me? Dr. Kwok, do you want to respond first, and then I'll respond?
Since the pandemic, we have used Zoom so often, that is in teaching or in conferences. If we start with Zoom, that is just like tonight, and it is very similar to teaching, and then we may feel more comfortable. And if I then start using StreamYard, which is a recording software, at first, I feel a little bit more conscious of what I'm doing because that is different from Zoom. And several weeks ago, I had a podcast with a former student, that is Juan, and she talks about how she overcomes that. She overcomes that by just using the mic and recording herself, just talking every day, just a little bit. And then after you practice more and you feel less conscious of yourself being recorded.
That was very similar to what I was going to say too. I think practicing is a big part of it. I know that when I first started taking preaching classes at seminary, people feel very awkward. And maybe they're used to giving lectures or doing public speaking, but it's a different format. Preaching is a different format, and so is podcasting and interviewing. And with all performance arts, because these are performance arts, you just have to do it. You just keep doing it, and you're bad until you get better. And I do agree that sometimes just setting things up and talking into it, it helps to keep you from being very nervous. I know when I first started recording as a musician, I would just be in the studio and I get so nervous just to play the music, even though I play music all the time. And the longer I spent in the recording studio, the more relaxed I could be, the more comfortable. I became very familiar with, oh, what's happening here? This is a microphone. This is a pop filter. How do I want to sit? What happens when I talk too loud? Things like that. And you just grow more comfortable over time. I think that oftentimes when I do interviews, it's easier for people to do them in person than it is online, but especially if you are looking at yourself in the camera, it can be very distracting. So sometimes I like to do conversations which are just in person, and I'll bring multiple microphones and I'll record it. And then people actually forget that they're being recorded in a podcast and they can feel more natural. But it's true, it's not easy and it's not always something that comes naturally to everyone, but it is something you can learn. It's a skill that you can craft.
And also, I think that the beginning is always tricky, isn't it? And that is why before recording, I just practice the beginning part, what I am supposed to say. Once I started, then it's easier. So maybe just practice the beginning part if you do not want to script the whole thing, which is very time consuming. And then at least practice what you will say in the beginning, and then that will also help.
And with public speaking, sometimes it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you feel very nervous, and then because you get nervous, you don't speak very well. And then the worse you speak, the more nervous you get. So I always tell people, it's okay. We can always stop. We'll delete all the things and we'll just record again. Or if you mess up, it's not the end of the world. So I think that's what I do to myself too. It's okay if I messed up. It's okay if I didn't say it perfectly. I can try again. That's the beauty of the recorded medium, is that you get many chances and it's not live. Sometimes I try to turn myself away from feeling a lot of shame because I find that makes it worse. And I become a worse speaker the more anxious and shameful I feel. So I just try to like empty my mind and let it all go. So sometimes before you do an interview too, it's good to center yourself and ground and then maybe do some breathing and clear your mind, especially if you feel a lot of anxiety. I think that doing that can help you because if you bring all of the nervous energy in, it will usually amp up and it'll become worse as time goes on. So sometimes you can also just say, hey, can we just pause? I'm going to relax. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to just take a moment and then you can try back in and you can edit it so that never happens. So no one in the listener even knows that you stopped.
I have a question for Dr. Puilan. Now, Sue-Ann just mentioned that you were using that $400 microphone, but how come I don't see it on the
Oh, it's
screen?
here.
Where is
No, here.
Sue-Ann? I can see her
Yes.
microphone.
I put it in an angle so you cannot see.
I
Now,
just
let
I'm
me,
curious, like how
yes,
far away you can put the mic
no, the phone is actually here. It is quite close.
here.
Yes.
Oh,
Let me share
okay.
with you why I bought this.
Yes,
Because
yes,
I have
please.
3 different mics, okay?
Oh, wow.
One is this webcam, which is just $120 some. The second is the $100 one. That is the Blue Yeti, which is very popular. It looks like a microphone, right? And I got it, and it is quite good. But then everybody said this Shure thing is really nice. So I said, okay, if I bought this very expensive thing, that this is real, that I really have to commit to do this. So this is tricking myself to think, okay, now you have committed, so you better continue, at least do 3 more, not just the 3 and stop and join the 90% people who did that. But the quality of the sound is very different. One thing I did not know, because before I have edited videos, and I didn't pay so much attention to the sound quality. Because for the video, you have the body language, you have all these things. You do not focus just on the sound. But once it is a podcast, the quality really matters. So when I went back to listen to my first podcast, which I did not use this fancy thing, the quality, of course, was not very good. And because there were so many podcasters, you are competing with many people for audience. And then if you have a better mic, and then it is better. But do not start with it. I fully agree with Sue-Ann. You can really try with what you have. An iPhone, an Android phone is already a very good camera, and the sound is pretty good. You just try it out to see if you can sustain your interest. For me, because I have already lined up so many friends, right? In the beginning, I lined up 20 people, okay, who will speak when. So I know that I am committed to it. But I think it is really wise to try it out before you commit to buying all this fancy equipment.
First of all, thank you, Puilan and Suen, for this workshop. It was really helpful. So thank you. What's the big difference between editing and mixing? As I was looking at the PowerPoint, to me, it wasn't really clear in terms of their boundary. So how editing is different from mixing, or they're overlapping? So that's my first question. And second question is, I see that Swen has this fancy microphone, and Pulan, we cannot see yours, but you have it. But that's for the host of the podcast. But you are talking to someone on the other side, right? So what about that person who doesn't necessarily have fancy microphone? If you do speak with them through Zoom or Face Talk, whatever. So there will be difference in terms of the audio quality. So that's my second question. And then I'm not starting podcast. No, the reason I'm attending this workshop is just to learn what that is. But as I was listening, I was thinking about podcast as one of the course assignments for my students. Because students don't have to buy fancy one, right? They can use their phone. And this younger generation is much more tech savvy. So I think they can learn quickly. If any of you have used podcast as an assignment in class, or if it makes sense, first of all, as a college classroom assignment. So those are my three big questions.
That's great. I can answer those. So the difference between editing and mixing has more to do with, the editing is the linear aspect, right? We're talking, oh, we mess up. So we cut out the part that we mess up. We put it back together. But mixing has to do with the layers. So how much of this audio is going to be the volume compared to this audio as they're layered on top of each other. Or that's more obvious when you have music, or sometimes you have two people talking over each other. You want to be able to hear them. So mixing has more to do with the quality of the sound. For instance, how high it is, how noisy it is, how loud. The editing has more to do with the linear aspects. For example, in Descript, which is the software that Dr. Kwok uses, you can edit it using a transcript. So it makes an AI transcript of all the words that people are saying. And then if you delete the word, it will take that away. That is editing, but that is not mixing. Mixing will be how loud is it? How clear is it? Is a high very high? Is there a noise in the background? Those are mixing elements. So it has to do more with the different axes of the things that you're changing. So then the next question is a great question, because your host could be great. They have a great microphone, but your guest doesn't always have something great. That's why I like people to learn how to use recording equipment that is common to them, because oftentimes that's what your guests will be using. For instance, I can see I think you're using Apple headphones right now, Nami, right? Those are fine as long as they're recorded into a good source. So I might have somebody plug those headphones into their phone and then record the voice memo and then send me the voice memo. That is going to be a better recording than what I get through Zoom, because what goes through Zoom has to then be compressed, and then it has to go through the whole internet, and then it has to be transmitted to me, which is why sometimes the Zoom, it's garbled or it picks up or loses certain sounds. But I often ask people just to open QuickTime or any kind of recording app on your computer or the voice memo on your phone and just record it while we talk on FaceTime or Skype or Zoom. So that works quite well. When I'm often a guest on podcasts, and then I will record myself using my high quality equipment and send it to them so that they have a high quality recording of me, even though they might not get it on their end. If you use one of the all-in-one podcasting services, they really work hard on capturing audio well for people who are in remote locations. So I could send you the link to Descript, and we could have our conversation on the video chat platform in Descript and hit record there, and it will record it directly from you onto the website and directly from me onto the website. And as long as you're using like that microphone, the quality should be fine. That's my recommendation. But sometimes when the recording is very bad, it's usually because the host is recording through the connection instead of recording directly at the source where the person is. And so that's my bypass, my getaway, the way I get around it. And then the third question is, I've actually taught some TA'd courses where we did podcasts for students. So sometimes that was just in a regular undergraduate setting. Sometimes it was in a musicology or a music school. How do you do a podcast episode where you talk about a work of art and explain the history or what's going on with the composers or the meaning behind it? Sometimes it's an interview. Sometimes it's a conversation about a topic. I recorded a podcast with another classmate as an assignment before, and it was fun. I think it's a very excellent assignment for students for two reasons. One, it's really good to learn those technical skills. And the second thing is that it's important for them to learn about what makes content interesting. So they have to figure out what they're going to talk about, and they have to figure out the how they're going to do it. And usually schools have a certain baseline amount of equipment. You don't have to invest a lot of money. You could just buy a few things and they can all take turns using the same equipment. But I think whether you're an academic, whether you're a pastor, or you just work in a nonprofit space, those are all really important skills, because we live in a media world now where knowing how to do basic audio editing and video work comes in really handy to communicate with the public, to do public work. Young people are supposedly savvy at technology, but they're not always good at actually working and doing these technical things. They consume a lot of content, but they don't often know what goes into creating it. And I think it's a really good lesson to help them say, oh, now I have to find out what it's like. My nephews are obsessed with YouTubers. They want to be YouTubers when they grow up. They watch so many YouTube videos every day. But I think they don't realize how much work goes into actually making YouTube videos. I think if they did that, maybe they wouldn't want to be YouTubers. And they would be able to appreciate how hard it is to make good content. Do you have any feedback on the questions, Dr. Kwok?
I have a colleague, and when they do the podcast, the company bought a very fancy mic and send it around to avoid the issue that the guests did not have very good equipment. But in some of those editing software, you can do something about it because you can compress, you can use the equalizer that helps a little bit to make it smoother between two people. And when you talk about assigning a podcast, are you asking people to do it once? Just create a podcast on a topic? Do you have particular things you have in mind to ask the students to do a podcast?
Me?
Nami?
Oh, yes. These days we talk a lot about AI created paper and final paper, etc. So I was thinking, what if I assign podcast with good questions and students have to answer those questions, or they'll have to interview other classmates to be able to address some of the things they have learned throughout the semester. So it's more like a summative assignment at the end of the semester. So they can have this transferable skill, how to use podcasts, but also in terms of the content, they can show how well they have learned the subject matter of the course. So that's what I was thinking. But I'm sure there can be other ways of using podcasts in class. So I'll have to explore what other options are.
Yeah, I have used a similar way of encouraging people to do creative final projects. And sometimes you will be very surprised that the students can do those things very well.
I think it's a great idea to deal with the AI problem. I was talking to some other educators about how we're probably going to bring back oral examinations, just like they used to do back in ancient Greece, because that's one way you can get around cheating with AI. But I also think it's a really important life skill to know how to discuss the things you learn in school in a way that's approachable. I think that oftentimes our work as academics is very inaccessible to the public, and it takes a lot of knowledge and skill to figure out how to talk about it in a way that other people can understand. So I think that as a final assignment, both kind of deals with the cheating problem, but it also can help hone a skill that many of us are trying to sharpen. You go to a party and someone says, "What do you do? What do you research? Can you explain what it is that you do and why it matters?" And more, I think that's important for us to learn how to articulate, or especially to encourage students to figure out how to articulate that for themselves as well.
I have one more technical question. Now, Sue-Ann, you mentioned that using, for example, iPhone using the voice memos, the quality is already good enough. That is for audio. What about video? Using the iPhone video is also good enough to record. For example, we have 2 or 3 people in that podcast and we do video and we're not in the same location or country or city.
So for podcasts, the video is never that high quality because it's not to shoot it like a TV show. It's like live stream energy, right? So, so as long as people can see you, that's the point. I think that, like, the quality of our cameras on our phone is HD. It's very high quality now. The reason why some of our video content doesn't look fancy has more to do with lighting and staging, all of that. It has less to do with the actual quality of the camera footage. I think that you should not worry about lighting. Turn on lights when people are recording.
Good, because what we have in mind, we are a group of people, actually, a few of us are here. We plan to actually put out podcasts, but I think probably, I don't know, either audio or maybe video, but it's always a panel, more than 2 people. Like it would be like 4 people, probably a host and talking about or discussing about the same topic. But the 3 or 4 of us are in different cities. So that's my concern. But if you think the quality is actually not that important, then I'm okay.
I think using StreamYard, which Dr.
Yes.
for if you have a panel with multiple people like that. So that's a great platform.
Because it allows you to have 10 speakers. So there are platforms that can accommodate that. But I have also once used the phone, not for that purpose, that is the people are not in the same location. So I use my phone just to videotape people. And then that is also a learning experience because I actually brought the lighting, this light with me, and then of course the microphones. But I had so much fun. Everything is a learning curve, isn't it? And so I just did that. And then I thought, oh, that is also very well received. At least you can put it on YouTube and it is usable. Please join me in thanking Sue-Ann. And Ann is available, as she said, for consultation. And you can reach her. She has the website, sueannshare.com. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.